Before I started Whiskey on the West Coast, there was a fun whiskey challenge making the rounds on YouTube called the You Only Need 5 Whiskeys Challenge. And the concept was that you had to pick whiskeys to fit into 5 different categories, which would represent your whiskey shelf if you could only have those 5 whiskeys. The 5 categories were a guilt-free pour, or daily drinker as some people called it, impress a guest, a mixer, a Friday night pour, and a special occasion whiskey. Better late than never, this is my entry into the You Only Need 5 Whiskeys Challenge. My name is Matt, this is Whiskey on the West Coast. I'm gonna make 2 small rule changes for my challenge, and the first one's gonna be that I actually have to have a bottle of the whiskey I choose on my whiskey shelf right now. The other change I'm gonna make is that I'm gonna include some honorable mentions in some of the categories just to keep the list as accurate as possible to what I would actually personally choose while still trying to keep it interesting for you watching. Let's get to the first category, which is the guilt-free pour. To me, a guilt-free pour is a go-to dram. It's one that is inexpensive and can flex to meet most moods. It's a whiskey I'd consider a perma-shelf bottle, one that you always keep on hand no matter what. Anything from my top 10 affordable single malts video I did could fit this description. And I considered picking Bunnahabhain 12-year-old, which is a sherried classic, or Ledaig 10-year-old, which is a heavily peated delight from the Isle of Mull. And both of those really are great values. However, if I'm honest with myself, my guilt-free pour is the Benromach 10-year-old Speyside Single Malt Scotch whiskey. It's so expertly balanced and it's such a sessionable whiskey that I can enjoy in really almost any setting. Despite it being bottled at 43%, it really is a fantastic whiskey. It's first fill ex-bourbon and first fill sherry casks using lightly peated malt, and it's just a whiskey that oftentimes hits the spot for me, but is also a great value. Benromach 10-year-old is my guilt-free pour. The next category is the Impress a Guest whiskey, and this would be a whiskey that you pour to really grab someone's attention and make them say, "What was that?" And the bottle I chose is one that when I've been hosting friends in the past is the most common bottle I've turned to, especially if someone has never had it before. And that bottle in this case would be the Octomore 12.2 super heavily peated Islay single malt Scotch whiskey from the Bruichladdich distillery. Octomore is quite the unique and singular style of whiskey, and there isn't really any other whiskey quite like it. This particular Octomore, the 12.2, is a 5-year-old cask strength whiskey aged in ex-bourbon as well as Sauternes sweet wine casks, and it's peated to an absolutely huge 129.7 phenol parts per million. I always find that heavily peated single malt, along with Sauternes casks, is a sweet peat crowd pleaser, and this bottle is no exception. My Impress a Guest whiskey at this moment is the Octomore 12.2. The third category is a mixer whiskey. Now, this is a category for an inexpensive, versatile, but still quality whiskey that you wouldn't mind using in mixed drinks, cocktails, or highballs. Oftentimes, my default for this category would be a bourbon or a Canadian whiskey. Typically, it would be Wild Turkey 101, Buffalo Trace, or maybe Lot 40, as they're all great to be used in a classic old-fashioned. However, there's a new whiskey that, if I had to pick just one, would take this category. And that whiskey is the McLean's Nose Blended Scotch Whiskey. This 70% malt whiskey based blended Scotch that relies heavily on whiskey produced at the Ardnamurchan Distillery is so versatile, it could be used and abused in almost every way. It makes a great smoky old-fashioned and is strong enough to still have it say as part of a mixed drink. It still comes through with the actual profile of the whiskey. It doesn't get drowned out. It's a fantastic whiskey for a mixed drink, and that is why it is my mixer whiskey. The next category is the Friday night pour, and this is the whiskey you reach for after a long week and you just want to relax and start the weekend on a high note. And this is the first category where I'm going to be bringing up an honorable mention. And if I'm honest with you, Friday night is probably the night I'm most likely to reach for my bottle of Springbank 10-year-old Campbelltown Single Malt Scotch whiskey. Now, knowing how hard it is to get a bottle of Springbank 10, I decided to pick a different bottle for this list for this video, which is the Kilchoman 100% Islay Barley Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey 10th edition. Now, this is a whiskey that's completely of the place it was made. Kilchoman is a farm distillery, and for this specific release, they used barley, only barley, they grew themselves on Islay. Typically, Kilchoman whiskeys are peated to about 50 phenol parts per million, but because they floor malt their Islay barley themselves using peat harvested from the nearby Loch Gorm, the phenol count for these is typically much lower, around 20 phenol parts per million. The bottom line with this whiskey is that it's a really delicious peated whiskey that I would love to have on any Friday night. This is my Friday night pour, absolutely. Before we get to the last category, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching my videos, for watching this far into the video, and for commenting, liking, subscribing. Do those things if you haven't already. I really enjoy responding to the comments, answering all your guys' questions, just engaging with you guys on the videos. So let me know in the comments down below what 5 whiskeys you'd choose for this whiskey challenge. And thank you so much to my Patreon members. Thank you for supporting me in that way. I really appreciate it, and I'm working on a new video for you guys for the future here. Let's get to the final category. Our final category is a special occasion whiskey. And just like the last category, I do have an honorable mention for this one. That's because the special occasion whiskey that I will most often turn to is one that's personally significant for me. Oftentimes it'll be a whiskey that I picked up on my trip to Scotland that reminds me of the memories made there and a trip that I'll never forget. An example of that would be my bottle of Port Charlotte 17-year-old Rioja single cask Valence from the Bruichladdich distillery. Now, this bottle is significant to me in a number of different ways. One, it's the first bottle I ever filled myself at a distillery in Scotland. Also, my partner Kyla went ahead and affixed the label to it, so we both kind of collaborated on this, and it's a really special whiskey to me. So special, in fact, that I've only poured it twice, once for myself and once for a friend at Christmas. So truly a special occasion whiskey. However, the whiskey I'm going to pick as my winner for this category is actually something that's really truly special in a number of different ways, but it's special because it's never going to be made again. It is something from a ghost distillery, and that would be this bottle of Single Malt Scotland 1998 22-year-old Imperial Speyside Single Malt Scotch whiskey bottled for Kensington Wine Market in Calgary. This bottle is an absolute divine tropical fruit filled and waxy whiskey. It is unbelievably delicious. I adore this whiskey, and that's why I'm being so precious with how often I pour it. The Imperial Distillery was only operated intermittently between the years 1897 and before it closed in 1998. And then it was demolished completely in 2013. This is a whiskey that will never be made again. And that's why it is my pour, it is my pick for a special occasion whiskey. Well, there you have it, guys. That is my entry into the You Only Need 5 Whiskeys challenge. Let me know what you think of my list and what your 5 whiskeys would be. Until next time, from the West Coast, Slange.